For about 3 weeks now, we've been at a standstill. Sometimes you might get a tiny bit of fuel, but it won't go far, so we can't start.
Bamako feels strange these days. Not dead, not silent, just tight. Like a city carrying a weight it never asked for. You see it in the long petrol queues curling across entire blocks, in the tired steps of workers walking miles, and in the quiet frustration hanging over markets that used to wake with confidence. Outside Mali, people think they know the story. They talk about blockades, encirclement, a capital under siege. The headlines make it sound dramatic, hopeless, almost cinematic. But the reality on the ground? It's far more complicated and far more human. Because Bamako hasn't stopped breathing. It hasn't shut down. It hasn't fallen. It's under pressure, immense pressure. But pressure is not siege. And the difference matters more than most people realize. So the question is simple. If this isn't a siege, then what exactly is squeezing the city this hard? Let's find out. Bamako gives off a strange feeling these days. Not panic, not chaos, more like a quiet tightening around the edges. The kind of tension you don't notice at first, until you do. Until you feel it in the slower traffic, the heavy air, the way people move with caution instead of confidence. It's subtle, but it's there. Walk past a petrol station and you'll see queues that look endless. Lines of motorbikes, battered cars, and tired faces waiting for a chance at a few liters of fuel. And while they wait, you hear the whispers. Always the whispers. We're surrounded. It's over for Bamako. This is what a siege looks like. People repeat these words because they're scared. And because fear spreads faster than fuel ever could. Outside Mali, that fear becomes headlines. Bold fonts. Dramatic language. Capital blockaded. Insurgents cut off supply lines. Bamako under siege. The kind of headlines that catch the world's attention, but rarely its accuracy. But here's the thing. When investigators actually walked through Bamako, the picture didn't match the headlines. Not even close. If a city is under siege, you expect silence. You expect emptiness. You expect tension so heavy it suffocates the streets. But in Bamako, the streets still hum. Not with comfort, no, that disappeared months ago, but with the strange rhythm of life refusing to give up. Markets are still open, maybe a little late, maybe a little slower, but they open. Children still return to schools that recently reopened after a short closure. Traders still argue about prices even when both sides know the argument won't change anything. And yes, people complain, loudly, angrily, but they complain while moving, while working, while pushing on. A siege freezes a city. Bamako is wounded, yes, but frozen? Not even close. It moves differently now, more cautiously, more emotionally, more tired. But movement is movement. That alone tells us this isn't the kind of collapse outsiders think it is. And then there's the atmosphere, the part you can't capture in a headline, the part you can only feel. People aren't panicking, they're adapting, they're improvising, they're enduring in ways that don't appear in reports or press statements. A man with no fuel walks 3 kilometers to open his small shop. A woman cooks with less oil because she can't afford more. A mechanic uses a torchlight during electricity cuts just to finish a job. None of this looks like a city surrounded by armed forces. It looks like a city navigating a crisis, a heavy, exhausting crisis, but still pushing forward.
Well, in the last 2 weeks with schools being out, it means that a lot of children, a lot of learners have stayed at home. So that's obviously putting constraints for families who have to then find what kids will have to do when they're not going to school. Business activities have significantly slowed down, not just in Bamako, but even in the towns outside of the main capital.
When you can't work, the whole family stops. Everyone suffers.
So it becomes impossible to accept the narrative of siege once you stand inside Bamako. Because the evidence simply isn't there. No military rings, no total shutdown, no collapse of movement, only pressure, massive, unrelenting pressure, squeezing the city from the inside out. And that leads us to the most important question of all. If Bamako isn't under siege, then what exactly is squeezing it so hard that the world thinks it is? To understand what's squeezing Bamako, you have to leave Bamako. You have to follow the long, uneven highways stretching out of the capital, the ones that snake toward Gao, Kidal, Mopti, and Ségou. These roads look calm from a distance, but anyone who uses them knows they've become something else, something darker, something unpredictable. These are the arteries that feed the capital. And for years now, they've been slowly suffocated by the presence of Mali's most dangerous insurgent movement. They don't operate like a traditional army. They don't conquer city centers. They dissolve into the landscape, controlling moments instead of territories, and that makes them far more difficult to fight. You see, this group's power isn't in capturing Bamako. It's in disrupting the routes that supply Bamako. If they can make every journey uncertain, every transport risky, every truck a potential target, they don't need to take the capital. They just need to squeeze it from far away. And that's exactly what they've been doing.
ANIM has cut off supply routes, it has attacked fuel tankers, it has strangled the city's economy. Its target is Mali's military junta. It's the same regime that promised security after 2 coups.
Truck drivers talk about roadblocks appearing out of nowhere, not big, dramatic checkpoints, but small tactical traps intended to slow movement. Traders speak of taxes imposed on passage, not official ones, of course, but the kind that get paid quietly to avoid confrontation. Fuel convoys report sudden detours because certain stretches have become too unsafe to travel. None of this stops movement entirely, but it slows it, it weakens it, it chokes it, one delay, one threat, one disruption at a time. And every disruption thousands of kilometers away eventually lands on Bamako's doorstep. This slow pressure collided with another problem the country was already carrying, Mali's fragile fuel system. Storage capacity is low, procurement depends on predictable transport, energy planning has cracks that widen under even minor stress, so when the insurgent pressure increased, the system didn't bend, it broke. That's when the fuel crisis hit Bamako with full force. Queues started forming. Transport collapsed. Prices climbed so sharply that even basic goods felt out of reach. And suddenly, to the outside world, the city looked like it was under siege. But this wasn't a siege. It was the result of a chain reaction, a long, painful collision between insecurity and weak logistics. A collision that had nothing to do with Bamako being surrounded by militants. It's hard to see this from afar. Hard to understand how a disruption hundreds of kilometers away can shape life in the capital. But inside Mali, people know. They feel the pressure not as gunfire or explosions, but as scarcity, delay, and exhaustion. Which brings us to the next question, a question you can't answer from maps or satellite images. If the squeeze on Bamako is coming from outside, then what does life inside the city actually look like under this kind of pressure? To see what pressure really looks like, you have to step into the Grand Marché, the loudest, busiest, most chaotic place in Bamako. Except now, it doesn't feel the same. The energy is still there, somewhere beneath the surface, but it's thinner, lower, like a market trying to breathe through a small crack in the window. When investigators walked through it, the first thing they noticed was the way people moved. Not slowly, not lazily, just carefully. Traders walked with a purpose, but also with an awareness that one wrong day could break their week. Many of them had already walked long distances just to get there, because fuel was too expensive to waste. They didn't complain about the walk. They complained about the uncertainty. Shops opened, but not with the confidence they used to. A butcher would lift his shutters halfway, check the electricity, and only then decide if he could afford to display meat that might spoil in an hour. The tailors worked with one eye on their machines and the other on the light bulb, waiting for the moment the power cut would force them to stop mid-stitch. And everywhere you could feel improvisation. Women selling vegetables used bags of ice instead of refrigerators. Mechanics held their flashlights in their mouths when electricity failed. Sellers of cold drinks switched to warm ones, knowing customers didn't like it but had no other choice. Yet, even in this exhaustion, life continued. And that's what struck investigators most. On Saturdays, when fuel supply eased slightly, the entire market changed character. Motorbikes reappeared. Goods arrived in bulk. Colors returned. The noise grew louder. It was as if the city exhaled for one day, only to hold its breath again the next morning. At petrol stations, frustration mingled with something unexpected: solidarity. People shared water under the sun. They exchanged updates about which station had received fuel. Some even held places in line for strangers who had run home to fetch extra containers. That's not what a city under siege looks like. That's what a city under pressure looks like. tired, strained, but still human. Still, no amount of resilience changes the fact that life is hard. Very hard. Informal workers, the backbone of Bamako's economy, watched their income crumble because fewer customers came, fewer goods arrived, and fewer people had money to spend. Every day felt like gambling with fate, but there was something else rising beneath the hardship, a sense that this pressure wasn't temporary, that it wasn't just a moment, that something deeper was feeding it, something older and harder to fight. Which leads us directly into the next question, the one that changes the entire investigation. If Bamako's resilience is still holding the city together, then why does the crisis keep getting worse instead of stabilizing? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. The crisis isn't getting worse because people have stopped fighting through it. It's getting worse because the roots of this pressure run far deeper than most people realize. When investigators trace the problem backward, beyond the markets, beyond the fuel queues, beyond the roads, they found something bigger, something older, something woven into the very structure of Mali's conflict. This isn't a normal war. Mali isn't dealing with a simple government versus rebels confrontation. What's happening is more like a slow unraveling of systems, political systems, economic systems, and social systems, all strained for more than a decade. And once you understand that, the deepening crisis starts to make sense. The conflict in the Sahel has always had its own rhythm. Historically, groups in the region never fought territory-based wars. They fought mobile, shifting battles shaped by survival, autonomy, and negotiation. Today's insurgency is just the modern version of those old small wars, but fused with insurgent ideology, regional politics, and decades of mistrust between communities and the state. In central Mali, armed groups aren't just fighting, they're governing. Quietly, informally, but effectively. They tax trade routes, they control movement, they enforce their own rules, they settle disputes. It's a parallel system, imperfect, brutal, unpredictable, but one that exists because the official system often doesn't reach these remote areas. And this is where Bamako's pressure begins. When an armed group regulates a road in Mopti, it changes the cost of goods in Bamako. When a farmer in Ségou can't transport his harvest without paying informal levies, markets in the capital feel the shock. When transport companies choose dangerous shortcuts to avoid checkpoints, fuel supply becomes unstable. Every part of the country's rural pressure eventually lands in the capital, not as bullets, but as shortages, delays, and exhaustion. So the crisis keeps worsening because military action alone can't reach the root of the problem. You can't bomb mistrust, you can't shoot economic distortion, you can't eliminate parallel governance through force, and you can't stabilize a city if the roads that feed it remain unpredictable. That's why every attempt at a purely military solution fails to deliver long-term stability. It treats the symptoms, not the source. The insurgency isn't just operating with weapons, it's operating through social gaps, political cracks, and economic weaknesses that have been building since the 1990s. Therefore, the pressure remains. Therefore, the crisis deepens. Therefore, Bamako feels squeezed even though no enemy stands at its gates. And this brings investigators to the next unavoidable question, one that goes beyond soldiers, beyond strategies, and beyond what the headlines want to admit. If military force can't fix a crisis this deeply rooted, then what path forward is actually left for Mali? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. If military force can't fix something this deep, then Mali is left with one option, negotiation. But not the soft, diplomatic, photo-friendly negotiation people imagine in conference halls. No. What Mali needs is something far more grounded, far more uncomfortable, and far more connected to the reality of how the country actually works. Because negotiation here doesn't mean surrender. It means survival. Investigators spoke to scholars, market leaders, religious figures, youth organizers, even former fighters, and almost everyone said the same thing in their own way. You cannot solve a social conflict with bullets alone. You must speak to those who hold real influence. You need the right people at the table, not just the official ones. And those right people in Mali aren't always government officials or elite politicians. In many areas, the real authority lies with community elders, religious leaders, local hunter guilds, traders associations, women's groups, and neighborhood committees. These are the people who shape daily life, resolve disputes, negotiate passage, and maintain fragile pockets of peace long before the state arrives. Ignoring them is like trying to fix a broken roof without touching the foundation. But here's the tension. Mali is built on a secular framework, and including religious voices openly in political talks goes against the formal rules. Yet excluding them goes against reality. Because in the villages where the crisis actually takes shape, imams and traditional leaders have more influence than any state representative. They can halt conflict, they can open roads, they can calm tensions, they can negotiate in ways the state cannot. So Mali faces a choice between rigid ideology and practical survival. And the pressure in Bamako is a reminder that choosing ideology has a cost paid not in theory, but in fuel lines, electricity cuts, empty pockets, and exhausted families. Negotiation doesn't mean handing power to radicals. It means acknowledging that stability cannot be built on military operations alone. It means accepting that the crisis isn't a top-down problem, it's a bottom-up one. It's born in the peripheries, shaped by local dynamics, fueled by local grievances, and stabilized only through local legitimacy. A meaningful negotiation would bring together community leaders who understand the terrain, market actors who feel disruptions instantly, transport unions that know which road is safe and which isn't. Religious figures are trusted by their neighborhoods, women who keep households functioning despite shortages, scholars who have studied these conflicts for decades, youth organizations that can rebuild trust where the state lost it. This is not a romantic idea, it's a pragmatic one, a necessary one. Because every year Mali avoids this reality, the pressure tightens. Bamako feels the squeeze not because it is surrounded by fighters, but because it is surrounded by consequences. So the real question isn't whether negotiation is the right path. It's whether Mali is willing to take it before the pressure transforms into something worse. Which brings us to the final decisive question. If Mali chooses a realistic, inclusive negotiation strategy, what future does that open for Bamako, and what danger does it prevent? If Mali chooses negotiation rooted in reality, not pride or ideology, the future it opens for Bamako is subtle at first, almost invisible like a small shift in the wind. But those tiny shifts matter, especially in a city living under the weight of constant pressure, because relief never arrives like a storm. It arrives like a slow sunrise. Fuel starts becoming predictable again. Not cheap, perhaps, but steady. Enough for traders to plan their week without fear. Enough for taxi drivers to return to work without gambling their earnings on fuel lines that go nowhere. And when fuel stabilizes, transport stabilizes. When transport stabilizes, markets stabilize. One small correction begins nudging the entire city back into rhythm. Trade routes reopen in ways that actually last. Not because the army secured some temporary stretch of road, but because local leaders negotiated safety, monitored movement, and rebuilt trust step by step. The kind of peace that isn't announced in press conferences, but felt in the way farmers travel again without paying hidden taxes, or in how goods arrive on time because the road wasn't blocked this week. Electricity cuts slowly decrease because demand becomes predictable. Informal workers, welders, tailors, butchers, mechanics recover the stability that pressure stole from them, and households begin to breathe again, not fully, not instantly, but enough for people to stop living in survival mode. This is what negotiation offers: space, breathing room, the chance for life to feel normal again, even if the wider crisis still exists somewhere beyond the horizon. But there's another side to this. A warning, a truth investigators could not ignore. Because if Mali avoids negotiation, if it clings to the idea that force alone can solve a conflict rooted in decades of fragmentation, then the pressure Bamako feels today may not remain pressure forever. It can sharpen, harden, tighten until the slow-motion squeeze becomes something far more dangerous. That is the real threat. Not an army marching on Bamako, not fighters surrounding the capital, but the gradual accumulation of strain, economic, social, and psychological, reaches a point where the systems that keep the capital functioning finally snap. Pressure becomes a shortage. Shortage becomes paralysis. Paralysis becomes fear. And fear, in a city as tightly interconnected as Bamako, can create breakdowns that no military ever intended. That's the danger negotiation prevents. Not just conflict, collapse. Bamako today isn't a city falling. It's a city resisting. A city standing on tired legs, but still standing. A city whose people refuse to surrender to despair, even when the odds feel impossible. That resilience is powerful, but resilience alone cannot carry the weight of an entire nation. This is what the investigation makes clear. Bamako is not under siege, but Bamako cannot carry this pressure forever. Something must give, either the crisis or the response to it. And so everything comes down to one final choice. Will Mali act now, while the city is still breathing? Or wait until the pressure becomes the very thing the world mistakenly believes it already is? Let us know in the comment section. Can Mali be saved? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.